So tonight, we are very excited to have Dr. Jay Lucker here to speak with us. Dr. J. R. Lucker is a professor emeritus at Howard University's Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders in Washington, D.C. He is still teaching as an invited professor, teaching the course he developed in speech and hearing science, which includes a section on acoustics. He has also written the textbook for that course. Dr. Lucker has presented numerous times on the subject matter and looks forward to a great presentation with you all tonight. With that, thank you again for being here, Dr. Lucker, and I will turn everything over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, good evening, everyone. So, thank you. And if you are having a good memory, you're here tonight because we're going to talk about, it says ethics, but I call it professional issues and ethics. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, which has the PowerPoint, and we will go from there. Okay. For those of you who have done online work before, I'm very familiar with online, and I'll tell you a little about my interest or the way I like to do online is that I will periodically pause and where is that? I'm trying to find the slideshow. There it is. Slideshow from the beginning, and then ask you if there are any questions when we go topic to topic. So tonight we are here to talk about review for the Praxis exam. And let me just start by wishing you all the best on the exam. And please, please remember, deep into your soul, into your mind, into your heart, okay? All that people need to do is pass the Praxis exam. Work hard to review. Work hard to pass it. But if you and I were best friends, and I'm just making up and we'll make believe 700 is passing for the exam, and you scored 700 and I scored 2,387, you know what? We both passed. That's all that matters. Okay? So, learning a little bit about, in general, professional practice and the focus on ethics for speech language pathologists. So, if you're familiar with Therapy Ed Review, this is Chapter 6. And Chapter 6, if you notice, it does cover ethical practices, but there's some other areas that are covered. And that's what we're going to discuss tonight, because that's part of what may be on the Praxis review. Okay, so a little bit about the history. Someone's going to say, well, why would history be something about ethics? Because it helps explain where we started as speech language pathologists. And from the Praxis review, Asha may ask a question. Okay, one example is, when did the American Speech Language Hearing Association first begin? Some people will think, oh, good question. And unfortunately, the answer is not in the Stone Age. Okay, the answer is, as it said here, the American Speech Language Hearing Association began as the American Speech Correction Association, and believe it or not, we were called speech correctionists and focused mostly on articulation and speech expressive language and fluency, stuttering disorders. 1934, the American Speech and Hearing Association changed its name to the American Speech and Hearing Association in 1947. Okay, and the thing is, then it became the American Speech. I'm sorry, 1947, and then it became what we call now the American Speech Language Hearing Association. Okay, in the 1960s. So we have a long history. Okay, first time the association met, which formed the American Speech Correction Association, was in Iowa. And there were 25 members. Imagine that. Not 25 speech language. There weren't many. I don't think there were any speech language pathologists. They were called speech teachers or speech correctionists. And for a long time, it was speech pathologists. Then they added the language. Okay. So historically, we worked on fluency, adult neurogenic disorders, okay, aphasia, and, dysarthrias. Okay. There wasn't really a focus on swallow disorders. Okay. Dysphagia. Okay. And in the 30s and 40s, they added motor disorders, motor speech disorders. Then something called childhood aphasia in the 1940s, which basically is kind of a hard area to really think about what it was back then, but it was basically children with severe language developmental problems that may not have been neurological, may have been more developmental. Okay. And some of those children may have had other issues. And back then, we didn't have diagnoses for these issues. Now we do. Okay. Aphasia in all ages and hearing loss became a large part of the association. We expanded. Okay. Then ASHA decided, as a professional association, we should have a specific scope of practice for the professionals we call speech language pathologists. And this is the beginning of the ethics. In other words, in order to say I am working ethically as a speech language pathologist, you need to make sure that you are working within the scope of practice that ASHA approves for speech language pathologists. And even if you are licensed in a state, most states follow ASHA's definitions and descriptions of scope of practice and ASHA's ethics. Okay. All areas of communication are involved: speech, language, hearing. Now, hearing in terms of diagnosing hearing loss and things, that's for the audiologist. But working with people with hearing loss, training their listening or rehabilitation, auditory training, okay? Speech for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, communication skills, and an area called auditory processing, an area that I specialize in. Also, swallowing was added, and now it is just a natural part of our profession. Motor speech functions, motor speech disorders, and speaking and communicating. In other words, working with people who have problems communicating appropriately with others, such as people on the spectrum, on the autism spectrum, who have social communication, pragmatic communication, pragmatic language disorders. Those are all appropriate within the scope of practice of the speech language pathologist. I'm going to jump a little. We kind of mention it again. We are not psychologists, but we still do counseling about communication, counseling about speech, language, hearing, auditory processing disorders, swallow disorders, counseling, helping families help their children, helping, families taking care of their adults. Okay, like, children taking care of the parents, okay, older parents, the elderly, in terms of helping them. We counsel them. Counseling is different than psychotherapy. We're not doing psychotherapy. That's the psychologist's job. That's their scope of practice. Ethically, that's what they do. But yes, it's appropriate for us to be able to do counseling. Okay. We are engaged in 5 domains. This is part of our scope of practice: advocacy and outreach for people. So in other words, if someone were to say, gee, I have someone I'm concerned about because of a speech, language, hearing, communication, swallow disorder, there's nothing wrong and inappropriate with you saying, well, I'm a speech language, once you get your certification and licensing, well, I'm a speech language pathologist and I can help you. What is it that I can help you with? Here's the counseling. How can I help you? Okay. Okay. We also supervise, right? So if you are students now, you probably do clinic work. You have a speech language pathologist who is certified in licensed supervising you. Okay, once you graduate with your master's degree, you're going to do what they call the clinical fellow year, right? The clinical fellow, the CF. And the thing is you still are under supervision to do that. Once you're, a certified licensed experienced speech language pathologist, you could be the supervisor, right? We also supervise assistants, which we call SLPAs, speech language pathology assistants, SLPAs. Okay. We also conduct research for something called evidence-based practice. It is appropriate to do so. We can do clinical research related to the clinical things we do, or do more scientific research if that's appropriate. Okay. And we get involved in administration and leadership. We may be the director of the speech language therapy, whatever speech, hearing language therapy services in a school district or in a clinic or in a hospital, or we may have our own private practice. Okay. And therefore, we're involved with administration and leadership. Those are things that we do that are appropriate, so long as they fall within that scope of practice of speech language pathologists. Okay. SLPs are professionals. They hold a graduate degree, as you all may be in graduate school, right? Okay. They then have the Certificate of Clinical Competence, the Cs, in speech language pathology. To obtain that clinical competence of the Cs, you need to pass one thing you need to do is pass the praxis exam. That's what you're here for, okay? For work in various states and districts in the United States, such as the District of Columbia, and even in certain areas, Guam, okay, Puerto Rico, as examples. Remember, they're not states in the United States, okay? They may have licensure. DC, District of Columbia, has licensure. You may need to be licensed in the District of Columbia in order to practice as a speech language pathologist. You need to be licensed in whatever state you're in, where you're working. Another thing that people often are not aware of is we live in this COVID-19 had many negative things, but there are some positives that came out. And one is what we're doing now, right? Which is virtual learning, virtual communication. We also do virtual therapy. Now, if you are a speech language pathologist, and I'll just use A and Z, how's that? In state A, and you are on your computer doing work with a client who's living in state Z, okay, one ethical factor is you need to check with the licensing board of state Z to determine whether you need to be licensed in state C as well as in state A. Even though you are in state A, your office is in state A, your computer is in state A, you are sitting here in state A, your client is in state Z, and most licensing boards require that you be licensed in the state in which the client is receiving services, which is in their home in state C. There's a move coming up, and it's going to be spread, especially for you as future speech language pathologists, where there will be regional licenses rather than state licenses. So that I'm just making this up. We're going to use letters again, where the states of A, B, C, and D, which kind of are touching each other or near each other, decide that if you're licensed, you get a license that is acceptable in state A, B, C, or D. And the thing is that people who live in regional areas, I'm one example, I have to hold licensure. If I'd used to be licensed in the District of Columbia. I stopped working in this District of Columbia, but if you're familiar with that area, I am licensed in the states of Maryland, at that time, District of Columbia, and in the state of Virginia. I still work in Maryland and Virginia, and if someone needs services, my services in the state, who come from Washington, D.C., they come to my office either in Northern Virginia near Washington, D.C., or in Maryland, because I don't have licensure, and I let them know that in the District of Columbia. Okay? We are autonomous. That means that what we do, what we are, we have the right to do it without getting permission from others once we are beyond the necessary supervision. Okay? So if you're working, let's say, in a school, and you're working with, let's say, a team, special educators, okay, psychologists, okay, and you're the speech language pathologist, okay? What you do is the speech language pathology appropriate stuff. What the psychologist does is what the psychologist believes is appropriate, and what the OT does is what the OT thinks is appropriate, and what the educator does is what the educator thinks is appropriate. But we are autonomous, and what we do is what we do, so long as it's within our scope of practice. Okay. One problem or one concern with ethics is called liability. Being an autonomous profession, we are liable to lawsuits. Now, if you haven't learned about this yet, learn from me for the first time or have it repeated that once you do go out and you graduate, you get your degree, you pass your praxis exam, you're doing your CF, whether you have passed the praxis or not, you need to carry liability insurance because any client, a parent of a child, okay, the children of an adult that you're working with, they could sue you. Okay. And the thing is, they could sue you, get a lawyer to sue you for whatever they believe is right. And what ASHA provides is a liability insurance, which could give you a lawyer to review the case to determine whether or not is it really an unethical thing? Second, is it really an illegal thing that you've done? Okay. So the thing is that we are liable, and we are liable to follow both the ASHA and state codes of ethics, which typically are similar, if not identical. Many states say that they hold the same code of ethics as ASHA. We're going to go over that, okay? And the thing is that ethics and unethical practices can be brought to ASHA, to your local state, by any clients, and they can find you liable to be unethical, so you're not get sued, right? Or they can find you to be illegal, or they believe that they can sue you. Okay? Why did you charge them so much money? This is what I'm making up, please. Why did you charge them, let's say, an extra $200, and you gave them a psychological evaluation? And psychology is not within our scope of practice. That's unethical. And the question is, you then diagnose them with a psychiatric disorder? That's definitely not within our scope of practice. You're unethical. And they may feel that they were hurt, and they sue you for it. Excuse me. Again, we talked about certification and licensure. ASHA is the only association that provides the ASHA-Cs, Certificate of Clinical Competence as a Speech Language Pathologist. But there are certifications in certain sub areas. Is that a good way to put it? Okay, so you may be a specialist in some area that requires you to hold some certification. Okay, and that may be important. You need to be aware of that and review it. States and districts like DC provide the licensing. ASHA provides the certification. You're never licensed by ASHA, and you're never certified as a speech language pathologist by your state. You're licensed by your state and certified by ASHA. Okay? For the exam, there may not be specific questions on state licensing, but more generalized stuff. That's why I'm covering this too. Both ASHA, excuse me, and the states require that you take coursework in ethical practice, that you know and understand ASHA's Code of Ethics. Example, in March of 2023, just this past year, ASHA updated its code of ethics. And the thing is that people who were licensed and certified decades ago, how's that? Okay. Okay. Some states may have asked them to prove or demonstrate through, written to written validation that they took so many coursework in the revised ASHA Code of Ethics, because some things have changed. We'll be talking about that momentarily. Okay. Okay. Ethical practice. Learn it, know it, check it out. This website that I put down, I'll leave this up for a moment so you can write it. Okay. And also, I just want to let you know if anyone wishes a copy of my PowerPoint slides, the last slide has my email address. You can contact me. I will be very happy to send you a copy of this. This is ASHA's Code of Ethics. If you go there, it says Code of Ethics. Then there's, links to ethic, principle of ethic number 1, principle of ethic number 2. When we think of ethics, you think, oh my goodness, there's going to be like 20 million things. No, there are 4 codes, but they cover everything that we really need to know. Code number 1, or key point, principle of ethics number 1. This is what it says. Individuals shall honor their responsibility to hold paramount the welfare of persons they serve professionally or who are participants in research and scholarly activities, and they shall treat animals, especially involved in research, in a humane manner. ASHA may ask a question about this. The best question or ethical factor here is when you are working with a client, and let us make believe you are the speech language pathologist for a school, or the speech language pathologist for a clinic, or hospital, or private practice. We're going to make believe the school, or the director of the clinic, or the director of the private practice, the head of it, tells you something that you should do, okay, that may go against what you understand and what you believe is appropriate to the client, the patient, the student you're working with. You're not supposed to ethically follow what the principal says, what the director of the services says, okay, the director of the IEP team says, okay? You're not supposed to follow what anyone says except for what ASHA says, which is honor your responsibility. Hold paramount the welfare of the persons you serve. So if, for example, I'm working with someone and they are demanding or asking, please, I need more services. Should you say, I'm sorry, can't give you any? Or should you say, I'll see what I can do? And then you see what you can do. Maybe you can give them more services. They need it. They need the extra services. They're requesting it. They're really begging for it. They're finding you're helping them very helpfully. But then, since you only see them, being honest, this is a real case that I'm thinking of, once a month for 30 minutes. And it was a child, so it's the parent who want to know, can't you see the child more often? And the person had to go to a higher authority. Can I see this student, this child, more often? Rather than just once every, 1 30-minute session a month. Now, the person could say, yes, you can, but we have to charge them extra. Or yes, you can, we're going to charge this or whatever. Okay? But you need to, in essence, we are there to serve, and I call it fight, but it's not fight. I'm saying fight for our clients, for the people we work with, for the people we help. Okay? Same in research. Okay? If you're working with someone in research and they aren't comfortable with the research and they choose to leave the research, you know what you have to say is, I hope that everything is okay. I would love you to stay. You sure you don't want to participate? Well, I wish you the best. Thank you for participating. The 2 times you did come, or whatever. We'll make believe it was multiple times. Okay? Because that's their need. Their welfare is what's most important. I have not done research with animals specifically, but I understand that. That's general for everyone doing research on animals. Okay. Ethics number 2. Individuals shall honor their responsibility to achieve and maintain the highest level of professional competence and performance. If this question were to come up, one of the things ASHA may say is, how do you do this once you are certified and licensed? It is called continuing education. You may have heard it abbreviated CE, CEU units. Okay? ASHA states for your recertification, because remember, when you're certified, you have to apply for recertification on a periodic basis. And it will say you have to apply for recertification. Have you completed so many hours of continuing education? You go for licensing. You need to relicense. You could be licensed, but after a certain period of time, you have to reapply. And that's the way the licensing boards check to make sure you're maintaining your certification and you're maintaining your licensure and you're maintaining your clinical education, the CEs. And so therefore, you take coursework. Yeah, you graduated, you finished, you're not going on for any other degree. No, you're going to still be taking courses. Where? Hey, plenty of places. ASHA has CE courses. Therapy Ed may have CE courses. Okay, there's many different CE continuing education courses that'll give you the hours and the coursework that you need. Number 3, individuals shall honor their responsibility to the public when advocating for the unmet communication and swallowing needs of the public, and shall provide accurate information involving any aspect of the profession. And I will tell you this, many times you may meet other professionals and they ask you, oh, what do you do? You say, well, I'm a speech language pathologist. Oh, they're surprised. Or they may say to you, do you work on stuttering? You say, well, it is an area that speech language pathologists work on, but it's not an area that I specialize in. And I'll give you, I'm open to say this, and we're recording this, right? Okay. I am a certified and licensed speech language pathologist, actually also duly certified. I'm also a certified and licensed audiologist. I specialize in an area called auditory processing and language processing disorders. And I evaluate them. I don't do therapy, but I evaluate them. Someone comes to me and say, well, do you do evaluations for speech and language? Yes, I do. For speech and language communication and processing problems. Oh, well, I think my child is stuttering. Can you evaluate that? My ethical way of doing it is I happen to know of an excellent speech language pathologist or a couple, excuse me, and maybe I can refer you to, tell me where you're located, because they could be in different places, and I would refer them to a speech language pathologist that I'm knowledgeable of who does work on or specialize in stuttering and fluency disorders. I don't. Doesn't mean I didn't take coursework in it. I'm going to be open and honest and say, I even published one of my very first publications. I'm also a researcher. And I published one of my very first publications was in the Journal of Stuttering. Okay. The thing is that, so I've done work on it, but it's not my area. Okay. And so therefore, I am responsible to the public to let them know it's not the thing I specialize in. And therefore, I'll be happy to help you find someone who does. Okay. And the thing is that I also help explain what are auditory and language processing disorders. I do a lot of that with people because they're not familiar. I hold and honor my responsibility to let the public, the people around, possible, future clients that I might see. Okay. But also when I go to school meetings, because I see children, especially for auditory processing disorders, the teams that I meet with to help them understand it because they don't understand certain things or they misunderstand them. And the thing is that I honor the responsibility that I am a specialist and I can educate and help these people learn and understand what is in our profession, what we do and what we don't, what we can't do. Okay. Number 4, individuals shall uphold the dignity and autonomy of the profession, maintain collaboration or collaborative and harmonious interprofessional and intra-professional relationships, and accept the profession's self-imposed standards. Like I said before, I work with others. Okay. Okay. One of the things that I have learned, and I think is important, has nothing to do with ASHA or whatever, is that if you work in a facility, okay, I'll use school as an example. You get a school speech language pathologist. You should learn a little bit as you're there about what are the educational replications or educational impact of speech language communication swallowing disorders, because you're in an educational institution. And the thing is, you're autonomous. You're the speech language pathologist specializing in these areas, but you collaborate with special education teachers, with regular education teachers, okay? With teachers who are the specialists in, the phys ed, art, music, okay? Okay. You also collaborate with psychologists. We collaborate with occupational therapists. We collaborate with a lot of different physical therapists, with a lot of different professionals. And one is, we can go back to number 3, educating them and helping them, but also learn from them so that we can work together as a harmonious group. Why? To help move forward our clients, the people we work with. What if you violate the principles? Okay. How would you know you violate? You'd probably get a letter or an email from ASHA that you have been, a report has been filed by possibly one of your clients, or if it's a child, by the parent, that claims unethical practices. Okay. And the thing is that in that letter, they may ask you to respond to the claim, or they may call you in to have a meeting so that you can verbally, it's almost like a hearing, okay, like you're in court. Same with the licensing boards. Licensing boards have a board as well that reviews ethics and reviews complaints. So if someone were to file a complaint, then you'd have to, see what evidence they provide and then provide your evidence to say that, wait, that's not valid. I didn't do that. Where'd you get that from? What do you say about that? Here's my report. This is what I did say. Whatever it is. Okay. Okay. Now, what can happen if you are found? I hate using the word guilty, but you are found to be unethical. Okay. You may just get a letter, and the letter may state in it, you were found unethical. I'm making this up. Because you don't have a good understanding of working with culturally and linguistically diverse populations. We will give you 6 months, I'm just making this up, okay, to have CE credits, and they'll give you the number of hours that you need, okay, of credits that you need to submit to ASHA to show that you have learned, you've taken coursework to be more knowledgeable and more understanding of working with culturally linguistically diverse populations. I'm using that as an example, okay? That's all they say. Number 2, they'll also say, and don't do this again, right? Okay. Number 2, they may say to you, well, since you've been found, I hate saying the word guilty, but since you've been found guilty and in violation of ASHA's code of ethics, in violation of the state code of ethics in this area, you will lose your certification, ASHA, or your license, the state, will make the leave for 6 months or even for 1 month. Okay? They may even, well, the states, I don't know if ASHA does this, but I know the states do this, which is they say, and you have to pay $1,000. There's a fee you're going to have to pay to get relicensed. Okay? Now, if you're licensed in state A, and that's where you work, and you put on a, let's say, 6 month, period where you don't have your license, it's not valid anymore. It is not only unethical, it's also illegal for you to practice during that 6 month period of time. So the thing is that you can lose your certification for that period of time. Worse, you lose it permanently. It is being taken away. You're no longer considered a speech language pathologist. You're no longer licensed as a speech language pathologist. Because just so that you'll know, if the complaint goes to ASHA, ASHA will notify every state in which you are licensed. If the complaint goes to the state, any state in which you're licensed, they will notify ASHA, who may know then all the states you're licensed in. So if you're licensed in, let's say, states A, B, C, and D, and state A finds you violating ethics, okay, and you lost your license, let's say, for 1 year, they'll notify ASHA, which ASHA may say, you've also lost your certification for 1 year, and they contact the other states, the other 4 states, you may lose the licensing for the year for that as well, okay, or permanently. So be ethical, be legal, care about your clients, uphold them to the highest standards, okay? ASHA will make public. It is published in, if you are a member of ASHA, or if you've ever seen it, the ASHA journal that goes out, okay? And there is a place in it where ASHA will publish that, people who have been found in unethical practices, and they'll list them so that it's publicly known, at least within our profession, okay? If a person calls and say, gee, I was thinking of going to Dr. J. Lucker for an auditory processing evaluation, and they contact ASHA about it, ASHA may say, oh, I'm sorry, he has been found to be in violation of ASHA's ethical practice, let's say 4 or 5 or 1, 1, 2, 3, or 4, and he does not have a certification again, and he won't be recertified. I'm making this up until January. No, well, January's coming up. We'll say until September of 2024. So, they're protecting us as a profession. Okay. Okay. Ethical practices in licensing. Here is a website that you can go to, which is part of ethics, which is part of ASHA, rather. Sorry. And then you can type in your specific state or a district like District of Columbia, and it'll give you the information about the state's ethics and the state's code of ethics and requirements for the state. So what are we talking about here? What's all this about? Okay, the bottom line. Okay, be ethical. Follow ASHA's code of ethics. Do all that you can to be appropriate and ethical. Number 2, remember, even when you graduate, you may go on. And when you go forward and you go on, you will still need continuing education. Keep aware of what's going on. Good example, for a long time, there wasn't much in the field about working with the LBQ, and I apologize when I call it the XYZ, all the letters there, working with that population. ASHA then said, I think we really need to have a standard that is part of the cultural linguistic diversity. And coursework was required. And people would take courses. Okay, I did through the District of Columbia Speech Language Hearing Association. And the thing is that it was very, very helpful, really helped to get a better understanding how we treat people who are different. Is that a good way to say it? How do we deal with people from different cultures? How do we deal with people with different language backgrounds? Is it enough to say, oh, I'll get a person to interpret for us, for me, and then my speech for you? Or do I discuss with you first? What is your comfort level? Okay. I've worked with many people who speak many different languages and come from many different cultures. And one of the things that I try to do, and I think it's very ethical for you to do as well, is to find out what you can about them, their culture, and their understanding of them coming to you in terms of what they see. Because that's very important, so that the terminology that you use, the wording that you use, fits with what they understand, regardless of what the interpreter is going to interpret. Okay? Because that interpreter, if it's a good interpreter, will just interpret what you say, not put it into an understanding level for the person and their understanding of it. So those are important things. Yes, I've also worked with people who speak other languages. I've even had people who have come, because I work with children mostly, parents who've come to me and say, I'm going to bring a neighbor, okay? And the reason is it's the mother who comes, the father's working, whatever, and the mother speaks not very well in English, and will say speaks another language, okay? But then they bring a neighbor who does speak English, and the person is comfortable with that neighbor. Well, I'll tell you, ethically, that might be a good way to do it. The thing is, you may also want to bring an interpreter who you've worked with, who understands our field and understands your work with speech language pathology, so that they have a little more knowledge of what language to use and what expressions maybe, to use. I've had interpreters who've even said to me, if I've said certain things, excuse me, Dr. Lucker, it might be better if you use this terminology, because they don't seem to understand what you're saying. And so I said, okay, ask them if it's okay. I'm not going to do it until I ask the parent if it's okay if I kind of give them a little education and explain what it is I'm describing, so they have a better understanding of what we're talking about and how it impacts their child. And then the interpreter has said that to the parent, and the parents usually say, yeah, that's what we want, And this is what I've heard once. I remember specifically that a parent saying to the interpreter, and then even saying in the best English that the parent was able to speak, you're the first professional who's ever asked if that was okay. Other professionals just talk, and it's almost like, you don't understand me, too bad. And I'm not saying me. We want to really hold paramount our clients. And when we're speaking with the parent of the child, the parent becomes your client too. Right? We don't want to lose our wings. Okay. What about where we work and things about that? Okay. We work in clinical medical areas. About 40% of professionals who are members of ASHA identify that they work in clinical and medical settings, acute care hospitals, rehab hospitals and clinics, community clinics, long-term care for especially the elderly. Okay, we'll start with that. Okay, there we have to remember we're working with medical doctors. Our focus is very often on a medical factor than a clinical factor, which may be different than people working in schools, where it's more on an educational factor. Doesn't make it different in a bad way. It makes it different because that's where we're working. We may work in private practice, whether it's solo, group, or multidisciplinary. Okay, and I have a solo practice now, but I still work with some other people. So I work multidisciplinary, even though I have my practice, they have their practice, but we work together. Okay, and I work with a lot of practices that way. I used to work in group practice as the specialist in auditory processing, language processing, and such within their practice, including many psychology practices and speech language pathology practice. I learned how important it is, again, uphold the dignity of our profession, but work jointly with the other people. Okay? Okay? In terms of university settings, about 33% of people who are members of ASHA see themselves as university clinic people, whether they're supervisors, and it's not teaching. We're talking about doing clinical work. Okay? And then in terms of public, private, and parochial schools, that's the largest percent. So that's the 54% that's left. So it's very important to be able, for example, if you have you get a job and you're going to be a speech language pathologist in a university clinic, it's not just that you're working with your clients, you're educating future speech language pathologists, like I'm talking with you now, right? Okay. Service delivery. This may come up. What's ethical? Okay. Well, multidisciplinary is the most common. Multidisciplinary is many people of different disciplines working together. The ethical thing there is it is ethical to say to, let's say, the psychologist explaining something, I'm sorry, I hate to, do you mind me interrupting you? Can I ask you to explain that a little better? I'm not as knowledgeable of the blah, 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 whatever the psychologist is saying. And yet you're going to be working with the client as well as them. But understanding what the psychologist may be saying may be very helpful for you to know how to deal most appropriately with your client. Okay? So that's important. Otherwise, when we talk about things, don't assume that the psychologist there, the medical doctor there, the nurse there, the nurse practitioner, the parents have had the same education you've had. So we have to kind of learn to be educators to help them understand what we're talking about. Okay? A good example came up today while I was at a meeting where, remember, I told you I'm not a specialist in stuttering, but this was a child who has seen and is working with a speech language pathologist on their fluency. And at the same time, they have auditory processing problems. Okay? Hey, you could have a broken leg, right? As well as a bad fist or whatever, whatever. Oh, you could have two, right? Here's a better one. You could have a cold as well as an upset stomach, right? Okay. So the thing is that a question came up about the fluency and the stuttering problem. Now, I told you I have a little bit of background, but the school team meeting had a speech language pathologist there who was trying to explain some things, but the speech language pathologist in the school openly told the parent that that speech language pathologist does not work on stuttering specifically. They'll do some stuff, but they're not a specialist in the field. Parents went out and got someone privately, but the private speech language pathologist was not available to come to the meeting. A question came up, and this was an interesting thing. Let's see how you would answer it, okay? Well, how do we know that this child really has a stuttering problem and it's not some other problem? Okay. And the thing is that the speech language pathologist openly said, well, when I work with, it's a girl, when I work with her, okay, I don't hear any fluency problems. Sometimes she'll start something by repeating it. Okay. But other than that, I don't hear. Well, everyone just sat back and said, oh, maybe it's not fluency. It's not a stuttering problem. So I asked the question. I said, could you please explain to the group, what do you interpret when the child says, repeating things like that? And the speech language pathologist for the school said, well, I guess she's just disfluent. So I said, can I ask you a question? And she said, yes. I says, under what heading is stuttering? She says, stuttering. I said, no. For example, if I can't express myself well, I have an expressive language disorder. If I don't understand what you're saying to me, it may be because I have a receptive language disorder. There's areas So what's the area of stuttering? She says, stuttering. I said, no, it's fluency disorder. And you just said she wasn't fluent. So why are you saying she doesn't stutter? You heard the quietness there? So I was educating the whole team, including the parent. And I wasn't doing it in a negative way. I was telling them the truth. The school speech language pathologist doesn't have a background in stuttering. So why don't she admit that it's not something I do? And really, maybe the school needs to get a speech language pathologist to work with this child who understands stuttering, or make the speech language pathologist go out and take a little bit of coursework to update her knowledge of stuttering. Next, okay, work with a multidisciplinary team, right? Educating everyone, okay? Interdisciplinary, okay? People from different disciplines working together. The team we had today, for example, was the school team. I work for the parent. So my specialty was separate, right? I was there for the parent, but also mostly there for the child, right? Okay. The thing is that because I had done an auditory processing evaluation of this child who does have auditory processing problems. And I explained how they impact the child and then pointed out all the educational stuff and even the psychological testing that indicates these could be auditory processing issues. Okay. So the thing is that I'm working with different disciplines, but I try to work interdisciplinary. Okay. Working within. Okay. Then the other thing is transdisciplinary. Okay. It's working together at the same time. We were not. That speech language pathologist in the school was not working together, trying to help, constantly saying, no, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. What can I say? Discrimination and non-discrimination. American with Disabilities Act. I think we're all familiar with that. And the Equal Employment Acts and Title 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 of the Civil Rights Act require that, excuse me, employees cannot discriminate based on many factors, including race, color, religion, gender identity, culture, from where the person comes, background. That includes schools. Schools can't do this either. Okay, because schools are still covered under the ADA. Okay, and the thing is that, it is not appropriate to identify a speech or language disorder that may be a difference. It's a difference. And if, for example, you have a client, let's say in a school, a child who is a speaker of a different dialectal language or a different language, and the child speaks because of that language, it may be their language factor. The question is if they understand English and can express themselves well in English, even though there's a little bit of an accent difference, it won't be an English language learner because they've learned English. Okay, but it may be a difference. Okay, one example that I can give is the TH, which in not just what we call African American vernacular, just bath, DF for TH, bathtub is a difference. It's just that's part of their language. If I said bathroom or bathtub, this is the way I put it. Okay, do you know what I'm talking about? The answer is yes. Okay. Now, it's very important, though, when we read, and I'll use, since it's coming up, CH. I have a friend named Charles, right? Charles. Okay. I know a girl named, whatever. I was thinking of something, but forget it. Charles. Okay. Then I sit in a chair. Therefore, I wish everyone a Merry Christmas. Did I say the right thing? In other words, when we're reading, why is it acceptable that when I see the C and the H, we change it to a K, a Christmas phoneme, a phoneme, and when I see a CH in a person's in the name Charles, a chair, I change it to the ch phoneme. Okay, so what's wrong with me learning to change those phonemes into the orthographic symbols? What's wrong with a person who speaks? another vernacular or dialect to change the phoneme they're saying for bathtub into the T and the H symbol, right? Using that as the example, and the bathroom into a T and an H symbol, but they pronounce it as bath. I don't pronounce Christmas as Trismus, and I don't ask my friend Charlie, right? No, CH would be Carly to be, right? Charlie to be Carly. I pronounce it properly. So why can't we teach that? It is accepting a difference, not a disorder. Okay. We must also follow similar factors in ethical practices with our clients, patients, and students. Right. Working in, oops, this one I can't even see the top. Sorry. Something up here I got to move. Working in healthcare and schools, we talked about that. Federal law mandates services in these settings. Okay. Be familiar with your state laws. Okay. There may be a question about not the state laws, but just the general laws about working in a school, working. Do children in schools have the right to have speech language services? Yes. Okay. Now, if it's impacting their education, it can fall under IDEA, right? Okay. Be familiar with Medicare and Medicaid and their rules governing the services that can and cannot be provided or reimbursed. So you may have to know that. So that instead of saying, I'm sorry, I can't do that, say, I can do that, but it won't be covered by your Medicaid. It won't be covered by your Medicare. It won't be covered by your health insurance. Okay? That doesn't mean you can't do it. Okay? You're educating them. Private insurance companies have their own regulations. And you can learn that through the facility where you're in. If they're, you're working in with medical insurance. Okay. Focusing on medical, typically in medical facilities, we work on medical-based problems. Okay. Clinic is medical, but also functional. So in other words, if you're working in a clinic, it may not be medical clinic. It may be more of a practice clinic. So maybe more generalized. And there, they may even work on some of the educational related things. In schools, the focus is on educational issues. But a good example, like at this meeting, a large part that came up is that there's a lot of, they break into small groups. That's social. That the child's communication problems may not just be educational learning and through the tests, but also the child not cooperating and not participating in school group discussions. So see learn more about what's specific to the schools, what's specific to the medical, and what's specific in your private practice. Okay, school settings, IDEA, Section 504. Big difference between that, if it comes up, is IDEA is to provide speech language services for children with speech language impairments or speech language support, even for children with specific learning disabilities or issues such as that. Section 504 is the Section 504 of the Civil Rights Act is that children should get accommodations. They may not get the services. They may only get accommodations. Okay? Originally, IDEA was PL 94142 in 1975, the Education of All Handicapped Children. It has been updated and it's revised. Be aware of some of those revisions. Okay? There's also the Brown versus the Board of Education 1954, which eliminated segregation in the schools. Okay? Early intervention, IDEA 1997, included children below the kindergarten. Because when we think of school, kindergarten is the youngest grade. But 1997, think about that. Joke is last millennium. Okay? Okay, the 2000, the 20th century. We're now in the 21st century, right? Okay, so we can provide services to preschoolers and younger because of that. I work with families as well as with children, family-centered treatment, as well as child-centered treatment. Okay, and we need to develop the individual family service plan, sometimes for preschoolers. Okay, sorry. Okay, okay. Speech, language, and cultural linguistic diverse populations. I already discussed a little of this, right? We need to be competent and knowledgeable about the cultures and languages that the clients we work with and their families are involved with. Okay, there are certain words to say that may mean something very different in another language, or they may not understand it as they've, even though they've learned English, they may not have learned that specific word. Okay, here's a good example. How many people taking a foreign language learned how to say dysphagia in that language? Good, no one's hands is up, right? Okay, the thing is that, yet what do you say to someone who has a dysphagia? Maybe you're having a problem swallowing, and it may have to do with some motor factors. And these are things that a speech language pathologist works on. Notice I didn't use the word dysphagia. Okay, many English language speaking backgrounds learn to be proficient in a second or more language so they can work on multilingual factors. Okay, we must respect our clients' language backgrounds and their cultural backgrounds. The tests and materials we use should be culturally and linguistically appropriate, right? And there are quite a few tests that are in other languages other than English, okay? And therefore, we may want to use dynamic assessments instead, okay? And if you do, in your reports, you may want to write that because the person has this background, this test was not appropriate because the material you used doesn't fit within their cultural knowledge and understanding, within their language knowledge and understanding. Or maybe the person's problem isn't that they have a problem with language, it's a problem with English language, not their native language or their L1 or their family language. Okay, supervision. As students, we must be supervised. As CFs, we are supervised. As CCCSLPs, we can do supervision. Once we come to that point, we need to also consider, did we have coursework in supervision? Did we take CE coursework since we're graduated? I've been out of the profession 5 years. You're now asking me to be a supervisor. I may really want to take CE, continuing education coursework, in how to supervise. Unless your background is different, I can think of my own graduate background. When I was in graduate school, I was not taught how to supervise. I was supervised, but I was not taught how to supervise. Okay, so if I became a supervisor, I would have needed to learn to do so. Okay, so supervise appropriate. ASHA has guidelines, look at them specific for supervision. Okay, and here's some of the things you can look up for ASHA. Telepractice, I already gave you one thing. You need to be licensed in the state in which the client is located while you're doing telepractice. But it is legal, it is legitimate, okay? Again, if you're not familiar with how to do it, how to do virtual, you may want to take CE credits, continuing education, to be able to say, I am proficient and competent. And also, what tests are appropriate? What limits are there in certain tests? What problems may exist because of the telepractice rather than the in-person therapy or evaluations? Evidence-based practice, I think we know that. When you do tests, make sure that the tests you use are appropriate and that the test manual shows that it is appropriate for evaluating and doing what you're supposed to be doing with the culture and the language person that you're working with, right? Here's a good example. Check out ASHA's National Center for Evidence-Based Practice. If you're into research, I've done this. A large part of my research has been evidence-based practice for things about auditory processing. Tests and materials, locate the research supporting it. Okay, I just said that, and keep up to date. Okay, if we're up to an example, the 5th edition of the XYZ test. Why use the second edition? The norms have changed. The population on which it's been normed has changed. The cultures involved, the languages involved may be different. Okay? Okay. Overall conclusion. Be knowledgeable and aware of ASHA's code of ethics, which change and periodically even beyond the praxis, beyond that. Keep up with ASHA. Okay? Be knowledgeable and aware of ASHA's stand on professional practices, professional affairs, multiculturalism. Okay? CLD, cultural linguistic diversity. Okay? Be aware of your state regulations. And if you're working in more than one state, multiple state regulations. Keep up with continuing ed. Be the best, most ethical speech language pathologist you can be. And I'll be happy to answer any questions. Anybody have a question? I'm here to answer. If you can't think of the question that you want to ask now, you can call me or best email me. That's my personal email address. Be happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right. Well, if there are no questions, we will say thank you so much to Dr. Lucker for coming and giving us that great talk on professional practice topics and ethical practice within our field. And with that, we'll say good night. Happy Thanksgiving to those who celebrate, and we hope to see you guys back for next week. Have a good night.